Okay, so welcome back to the WTM Deepening the Discussion series of conversations. And I'm delighted to today be joined by Maria Drueco. And Maria is an inclusion and equity strategist. She's a leadership consultant and a travel entrepreneur. She's based in Canada. She's a native of the Philippines and is also an award-winning author of Unhide Yourself. Maria champions equity and representation for women of colour and marginalised groups in leadership and tourism. And at WTM, Maria shared how inclusivity can be operationalized across the traveler journey. And we're going to get a bit deeper into that particular conversation. But before we do, Maria, you're really welcome and it's lovely to see you.
Tina, good morning from Alberta, Canada.
Good morning.
Good afternoon all over the world, whoever is going to be listening to this one. I'm so glad to be here having this conversation again with you.
Yeah, it's great. I felt we couldn't keep it to ourselves. We had to expand it out a little bit further. Maria, it was your first time at WTM London, I believe. What did you enjoy most about it?
Yes, it was my first time, and thanks for the invitation. I have attended other trade events, but I think WTM lives up to its name and brand that it's the most influential, maybe one of the biggest too. But what I find that you can actually tour the world just attending WTM.
Yeah.
It's important for me because, as you mentioned, I have a travel business as well in Canada. Aside from working in the inclusion space as a leadership consultant, I have a travel agency business that has been operationalized for 10 years. So we do a lot of group travel. We bring people to places that are important to their faith, empowering for them. So,
Mhm.
having been at WTM, I met different suppliers that have not met before. And so it will help me really move forward my business, my travel business,
Yeah.
you know, in 2026, because I have this direct contact with supplier. Aside from
Yeah.
that, having attended the sessions, it's very it's a very insightful event for me. It's just unfortunate that we cannot attend all the sessions that we wanted to attend because the place was so huge that we really have to walk 10, 15 minutes just to go to the different
Mhm.
rooms, right? Especially if it's at the other
Yeah.
side of the particular venue. But it's a great event. I would
Yeah.
really encourage people to attend the
Yeah.
WTM next time.
That's it. I find it a great opportunity, yeah, for meeting people and for learning. And there's so much to learn. And it's probably one of the reasons we've started this conversation series is a lot of people would not have come to your session or may not have made the Sustainability Summit. And yet it was one of those sessions we got immensely positive feedback on in terms of people were really grateful, and I don't think it's too strong a word, that this dimension was part of the sustainability conversation. The topic that you were part of a panel on was the human layer, inclusion, behavior, and travelers' choices. So, just off the top of your head, Maria, what do you feel is most important to open up about what you were talking about there that we can have a deeper chat about now?
Tina, one of the things that I noticed in this particular, the Sustainability Summit itself, um, there's a balance of the sustainability narratives, the data. It's all there. You pick great speakers, plus the fact that the people conversation was included, and
Mm.
I believe that made our summit, your summit, very successful because it didn't forget the people component to it. And based on how I see the audience, how I saw the audience participate, when we were speaking to the audience, when I was explaining my thoughts, sharing my thoughts, you can tell people nodding that they
Mhm.
are connecting, that they can relate to what
Mhm.
the panelists have been saying. And so for me, that's what I wanted to open up a bit more. It's the participation part. And that's where inclusion actually is very important. You know why? Because for our industry to become more effective, to become more impactful, we need to make sure that what we are designing for and what we are creating, not just the places that people would like to go to, but more importantly, the policies and the programs that we design. We have to make sure that inclusion is not just an add-on layer. It should be part of every program design, policy design, sustainability design that we are doing. because that mechanism is what actually makes it work. And I can explain further if you wanted me
Yeah.
to go deeper.
Well, I'm interested in what you say there. I feel with inclusivity as a topic, we can tend to move towards the compliance view, what you should do. And I think it came across in your talk, and maybe you'd speak about this, moving away from compliance to what you might want to do, and it being a positive design feature and how that has positive ripple effects. Do you want to speak a little bit more
Yeah.
about that?
And you know what? Sustainability as a initiative itself, it's not something new for our industry, right?
Yeah.
It's been years since we've doing something
Mhm.
about how we make our programs, our planet sustainable. But what I find that is, why are we not, moving the needle forward? Why are we not moving the needle, make it more effective for people? I don't think it's that people don't care. It's just that the systems that we build sustainability into, it's not designed for the people who actually lived it, who decides in it, and who works in it. And so that's where I think inclusion is the bridge that gaps all of these issues, the system failures that we have been experiencing before. Like, why are we not making it more effective? Yeah, we have the data, we have the certifications, but is it just for compliance purposes? How are we making people participate? So, one of the things I shared during the session was, you can make your plan delivered very good on paper, but you're not treating your people fairly. You're not paying them well. You're not making their voices heard. You're not making them part of the community's part of the decision making when you're designing programs and policies. So how can we make it more of a contributing? How we can make it more participating if we're just focusing on compliance? Because if you
Yeah.
don't address all of those issues, you don't make people comply. You don't
Mhm.
make behaviors of the people change. Yes, you
Mhm.
can for a while, but you will have issues like burnout, people leaving your company, people changing industries. And we've seen it happening across the industry. Like, after COVID, we didn't see a lot of people go back to work for the industry. They
Mhm.
change industry. Why are we experiencing those revolving doors, or maybe leaving, not even actually going back to industry? There must be something deeper to that. And I think that's the people component to it that we're really not addressing, and that we
Okay.
are, missing in terms of shifting focus.
So this idea, this topic of inclusivity, I think every time I hear you speak about it, you express it as people and not just visitors, but also community and members of the organization and of teams. Um, how do you actually hear the questions you're asking? And a lot of people have the questions. How do you operationalize the solutions? How do you make that kind of practical? Okay, here's an approach, here's what we do, here's how to go about it.
Yeah, and I think as a consultant, you yourself as a consultant, and what makes our work more valuable for leaders is that we support them in terms of how they think, how they make
Yes.
decisions. And one thing that I find very effective for us is to really guide them by providing them some tools on how they can really operationalize what we are trying to help them deliver, implement. And in my case, I use a certain framework. It's a step. It's not really a step, but you have to incorporate all of these factors in your decision making in every stage of your design and policy, to be able to make your sustainability program work. So I'm talking about creation. So I call it the 4C. It's really, a very a very simple term for people to understand.
The four
Um,
C's. The
four
four
Z's,
C's.
yeah,
Okay.
four C's.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the creation piece,
Mm-hmm.
the culture piece, community piece, and the contributor piece. So those are the factors I usually help guide leaders. And what is central in these four C's is the question of who are we involving in all of these factors. And
Is
so,
sorry
yeah,
to
go ahead.
interrupt you, Maria,
Yeah.
because I love a framework, even if you say it's, you know, it's loose, it's four C's, it's a way of going about that. I love that because people have a chance to kind of identify the steps and it just makes it a bit more accessible. Is it possible for you to just briefly speak through each of the four before we move on from them? So you said creation, culture, community, and contribution. And your
Yes.
question is who are we designing for at each
So
stage? Is
yes, in all of these stages, we have
yeah.
to ask the who. So for example, in creation, so when you're creating programs and policies and initiatives, who is really the who are we creating this program for?
Okay.
So it means that who are in the design table, who is included, who are not included, and what's the impact.
Mm-hmm.
Culture, I speak about culture. So when we speak about, and this is more for the marketing piece, when we help people how to really design marketing pieces, whose culture, whose stories are we really showcasing? And are we including those people who live these experiences in creating these stories and narratives? Community. So when we speak about community, we speak in tourism. This is very important, Tina, as you know, because people in place, they're integrated, right? And we cannot move the other one to make,
Mm,
the place more desirable, right? The
yeah.
people is there. And so community, who are we involving when we're designing programs and policies, whatever initiatives that we have for? Are they at the table? Are they, when I say at the table, are they in that decision-making process? One important thing too that I tell our, the people the leaders that I support when it comes to designing all these is, okay, so we are involving communities, but are we involving them just to get feedback, or are we involving them because we wanted their inputs? So those are two different things, I believe, because feedback is the after the fact. The
Mm,
input is when you are still creating that program and design, right? That's how I guide leaders on how to use that particular thinking. And
mm,
then, of course, contributor. So we have to make sure that we are also taking into account the travelers who are visiting our destinations. Right now, we know that our travelers are very discerning. If we say that, yes, we have a sustainability program in place, but they know that you have a lot of issues when it comes to your workforce,
mm,
they will not support you. They would like to see an ethical way of doing things when it comes to
yeah.
sustainability. And that includes how you treat your people. Again, I mentioned earlier, if you have this very beautiful sustainability goal and policies, but you have a lot of issues behind in your company, people are complaining about ethical standards or
Mm,
practices, not unfair pay,
mm,
you're not really getting that discerning traveler to support you. It affects the brand of the company. It affects
yeah.
your product. It affects how travelers really choose you
Yeah.
as a go-to when it comes to destination, when it comes to tours.
Yeah.
So those are the and again, contributor to, we're looking at the other stakeholders, investors really, because right now investors are really looking at
Mm,
not just one piece of the value chain, but the entire value chain. How are you making sure that sustainability is really making sure that it's just one piece,
yeah.
one pieces of the value chain that you are
Yeah.
supporting. So that's how I guide leaders in terms of those particular factors in creating and designing
Thank
initiatives
you.
and programs.
Thank you for talking through that because it helps make sense of what the four C's are and how you use them. I'm sure it is useful for the leaders that you are supporting. Can I ask you, in practice though, where do people get stuck with this? You know, what's the messy part of this that people find it
Hmm.
hard to get beyond?
I think it's always at the implementation stage.
Yeah.
It's yeah. I find that, there's the intention is there. They have very good intentions. The leaders have very good intentions. But again, if there's this gap again, if we're just looking at it as a siloed piece and not really incorporating, looking at the full value chain, how we can integrate all of these to
Mm,
make it work for the organization, for the
mm,
people that you serve, for the communities that you serve, and for your stakeholders. There's this gap that needs to be addressed. So
yeah.
again, it's hands off, it's the implementation. I find it too that if the leaders are not on board with it, they have a different mindset of how they should really make this work, it's not going to work, because, as you know, leaders are the one driving the all of these changes to their organization. So if we don't have the leaders on board, especially those making decisions, that's where it gets stuck. That's where it gets compliance, just on paper.
Yeah.
And I want to mention, Tina, that's, as you know, inclusion, diversity, equity, we're getting a lot of pushbacks in this
Yes.
past few years, past few months. And maybe, and that's the main reason behind it. It's because these values concept are not being operationalized. They're just on paper.
Yes.
Previous years, we've experienced companies saying, "Oh, we wanted to make sure that we are inclusive. How can you make us, or implement this in their company?" But they're not willing to change policies. They're not willing to change initiatives. So it's only superficial that they wanted inclusion and diversity, equity to be implemented, which now we're having this pushback because of those kind of mindsets and way of doing things.
Is it, I'm making an assumption here, so I'm just checking. What comes up for me when I hear you say that, it's kind of symptomatic of sustainability in general, where it's a policy, but it's not really integrated, or a decision is made at a senior level, let's do something about that, but somebody more junior is appointed to lead it, and they run into this internal barrier that the leadership has signed off on it in theory, but not really put the resources behind a change of policy or implementation. I see you nodding. That's what I think is a big issue for well-intentioned senior leadership, well-intentioned middle management, but you kept referring to the gap, that gap between, yes, we want to do it, but maybe not fully understanding what's needed to change things.
Yes, and again, it's all about the how they treat inclusion and the diversity, right? They think that it's just a policy, it's just another
Yeah.
program. What they needed to understand is it needs to be embedded into all aspects of their departments, right? So if you're, for example, sustainability, it's one aspect that they wanted to focus on, but they just think that inclusion is just part of it. They don't, give their middle managers the resources, how to make it work, how to make sure that it's included, it's embedded, how to support their workforce. Again, it's not going to be effective. That's
Mhm.
how we make, we're seeing it as a superficial piece or superficial action, and that's why it's failing.
That's
If
fair.
we
Yeah.
if we don't change that, we're just like, the mouse running on that wheel, right?
Mhm. Okay. And you mentioned there,
And
yeah,
sorry,
there.
Tina, you're losing billions too, because you keep on
Okay.
doing the same thing all over and all over again. It's not working. You're losing people. Imagine again from the HR standpoint, um, if you lose one employee, you have to make sure that you have at least 50% of that employee's annual salary be incorporated in your budget to be able to hire another one.
Mhm.
So you lose an employee, you lose the knowledge that employee and the experience that employee brings to the organization. And then you have to make sure that the employee that you're onboarding is now well trained. Look at all those gaps. Look at all those time and resources that were wasted. And that's what happens when you don't really make sure that it is well intentioned, it's well designed for your
Okay.
workforce to be able to implement it.
Just to dig a little deeper on what you were saying there, about that issue of implementation. Why do you think that it is so challenging for, as you say, even in a HR aspect, to move from mental sign-on to actual implementation? Really, you're speaking about a culture change, like
Yes.
a deep culture and mindset change, which I'm wondering how you really, what kind of time frame are you looking at if you're an organization? What do you need to do besides write the policy? And how do you affect actual mindset and culture change?
So, yeah, you have layers of questions there. So
Yeah,
first, I
yeah.
think
Sorry, so
the
many.
time, no, that's okay. The time frame, again, it's not overnight. You're changing mindset, you're changing behaviors,
Yeah.
you're changing the way people do make decisions, and it's very important. Um, I always believe that if you have all those people who makes the decisions, on board, have that inclusive mindset, inclusivity mindset, it's going to be easier because once they have that, they know that we should be prioritizing things that we have not been prioritizing before. That's why our
Yeah.
programs are not effective. And
Mhm.
so, how do you do that? If we need to make sure that there is a resource or a budget for this particular um, department to be able to implement this.
Mhm.
How can we get this budget in a certain way that it's being used in a way that is really impacting the change that you wanted to make sure
Mhm.
is being implemented in your department.
Yeah.
I think I've answered that first question. What other questions did you have there?
There you go. I threw too many at you. Um, Honestly, I can't recall exactly the questions that were there, but the it is that idea of it being a long-term process and
Mhm.
how your approach is more than bring in the consultant to help us at the beginning.
Yes.
It's something that's going to take a lot longer.
Yeah. And as a consultant, we are only there as a guide, right? We're not part of their company, and we give them recommendations, but it's really all up to them to make sure that it's being implemented. One piece too that I find it very important is accountability piece. So how do you make sure that leaders are really making sure that these changes are being done?
Mhm.
How do we measure that? I That's very important for me. How do we measure that how do you make sure that we measure this particular effectiveness of the program? How do you make sure that leaders are accountable? Um, if I can give you one example, for example,
Yes.
and again, in the HR standpoint, so how do we make sure that leaders are really are implementing what they needed to implement, treating people well? Make sure that when they have their performance reviews, yearly, you have that, right? As a part of your
Yeah.
performance. Make sure that you have questions that will guide them, that will measure how
Hmm.
they implemented the program,
Hmm.
how they supported their people. That's the
Hmm.
only way that you can do it. Otherwise, if it's not something that's measured, it's not something that we can make sure that we can attest that it's really changing.
Yeah. I guess like a question that comes to mind for me is if you can articulate, why is it so important right now? You previously mentioned, for example, there's a bit of a kickback now, there's a bit of a pushback. There are quarters in which diversity, equity, inclusion is being dismissed
Mhm.
entirely. So I'm almost answering my own question, but you in this space, operating in this space, why is it so important right now that this question of who and inclusivity kind of embeds what's happening in a sustainable approach?
Why do we need to ask these questions now? Like the who, why do we need to make sure that the who is not excluded in the
Hmm.
conversation? It's really more about making sure that the people who will be part of your program or initiative of your company is really um, you really gain the trust of these people, because with trust comes participation. I think that's the most important thing. Why this is important right now? We're not gaining a lot of traction when it comes to participation, whether it's travelers, whether it's our workforce, whether it's to our communities, because we're missing that who, we're missing that voice that they needs to be part of that decision making, part of that program creation, part of the culture that we wanted to showcase to the world. You need to make sure that participation is one of the top things that we need to keep in mind when it comes to making our programs,
Hmm.
initiatives, and policies work.
Yeah.
Without participation of the people, the travelers, stakeholders, communities, again, we're going back to square one. We're going back to the old way of doing things.
Hmm.
And that's how I see it when it comes to why programs are not working. Uh, Participation is also key because one of the things that we need to make sure is this something that people can access? Is this something that people can relate to? Is it something desirable for them? Again,
Yeah.
that's the who, right? So we cannot get this answer from looking at destinations. It's really the people who is the center of everything that we do in our industry, in travel, in
Yeah.
tourism.
Yeah. And when you say people, you are speaking about, I know a lot of our conversation is about workers and employees, but also about community and about
Yeah.
visitors and travelers.
Yeah, it's the people involved in our ecosystem, tourism ecosystem, the communities, most especially because they're the ones that we are now highlighting when it comes to narrative stories, the travelers, the decision makers, and all of these are people. It's not just one aspect. So whoever is involved in our ecosystem should be um, valued when it comes to making
Yeah,
decisions. We cannot have everyone at the table, right? But who is the most important thing? Again, it depends on the company's goals and the company's objectives, right? So you have to make sure, again, that this is not something separate from your strategy, from your vision, from your mission as an organization, as a destination company, destination marketing management office, right? Um, and to be honest, there's one tourism board that I am involved here in Canada. They're very good in terms of their narratives, and they ask me what else can we do, and that's how I told them, make sure that when you are, because they wanted to bring these people from their country to Canada. I tell them, make sure that whoever is presenting, they're not just presenting their products. Present their
mm,
stories if it's a family business, how they started with it. Because these stories are stories of lived experiences, real people, and we can relate to that, not with
yeah,
the features and benefits of a product. So
yeah.
that's how I guided them in terms of
Yeah. I find,
possible, yeah.
yeah, and it's practical and it makes sense. When you say it, it
It's not,
absolutely
yeah,
makes
it's not
sense.
something that you will have to invest in something, right? It's really just the participation piece is very important. Once we have this mindset that, oh, yes, in every decision that I make, who is missing? Who is not being uh, included here? And what's the impact to my decision? Right? In every stages that we make decision, I guess that's the question that I want people to know and
Mm,
to remember. The who, like who should be part of this conversation, who should be engaging with.
yeah,
And the question was, there are two questions after that that I wanted them to think after the who is, how can we make sure that our process in the processes we're in the process, can we have them be included to
yeah,
get input, not as feedback?
yeah. Often it's just so powerful to ask the question if it's a question you haven't been asking before. It just
Yes.
opens up a new way of thinking. And I'm also really interested, while you were speaking there, of, AI has become such a feature of our world, and yet in travel and tourism, it's ultimately always about people and places, and it's about the real world. And I wonder, in this AI revolution, whether the who will become more important for us to focus on, or whether we'll just kind of get sidelined a little bit by this virtual world we're in. But that simple question of who opens up so much.
Totally agree. And you know what? When it comes to I always say that when it comes to AI, who created this AI in the first place? It's the people, right?
Yeah,
And for me, I usually do a lot of unconscious bias training too. How, when you're doing this, if you're a tech company, how have you trained your people to make sure that they're not biased when they're creating these programs and policies?
yeah,
Again, it's the who, right? So you're incorporating the who in all of these aspects. It's a very important question too, regardless of which industry you work with. Again, because people is the center of everything that we do, and we
yeah,
are the ones doing it, implementing it,
yeah,
thinking about it, right? So
yeah. So I'm going to ask you, it's like, people hopefully are joining in and listening to this conversation, and they want to continue thinking and thinking forward on it. Um, what's the one big question you would leave them with besides who? So I think you're going to take who away from this, but if you were to expand that out a little bit further.
so when it comes to, I think, more on the practical side, so
Yeah,
where are we putting our finances in a way that we are creating the most impact to people, to planet, and to the places that we wanted to showcase. Um, Again, it's the how are we allocating all of our limited resources? better.
Connecting those
Yeah,
resources to
yeah.
multiple levels of impact.
Mm-hmm.
Maria, if people are interested in this conversation and want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Oh, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we can go start a conversation there for sure.
Brilliant. Maria, I know this is a conversation that you're deep in all of the time. Thank you for taking the time to bring us into it as well. I opened there by asking about how you operationalize this, and I think you've given us some kind of really good questions and a nice framework for doing that as well. And I'm going to leave the last word with you. At WTM, we were talking about this idea of sustainable tourism, looking at itself, challenging itself, and moving on to a new level. And this part, I think, is one of those where it's like that the sustainable choice is also the inclusive choice, just by default. Are you hopeful for that for the future?
Yes, and I was hoping that because we have started this conversation, you have started this
Mm,
conversation, Tina, that it will not end this year.
mm,
I'm hoping that it will still be part of the conversation in every WTM, because it's because of its influence, we get to get more people to hear our messages, right? Because
yeah,
if we make people change their mindsets to becoming more inclusive, that's where better behavior leads to, and better behavior starts with, I think, better decisions.
absolutely. Absolutely. And on that note, Maria, I think we'll finish up. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to deepening the discussion with you again.
Thanks for the opportunity, Tina.